So, Tiffany, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
I love that background, nice and natural.
Thank you. Thank
It
you.
fits the vegetative roof discussion we're about to have.
Well, my family and I are avid gardeners, so this one hits very close to home for us. So, yeah.
Oh, nice. So, coming into this conversation, I just have to think that a lot of people, a lot of professional people that are really experienced, still look at vegetative roofs for certain outcomes and not necessarily for all the solutions. So I'd love to spend a few minutes just talking about really what are buildings that can really benefit from applying vegetative roof technology.
Absolutely. A lot of buildings that we see across the U.S., the types of projects that we work on, they really are designed to solve a problem. Usually the design has not started with, oh, we're going to put this building in and we're going to have a vegetative roof on top. It really starts with, I've got a local ordinance that requires stormwater management, and how am I going to do that? One of the best solutions would be to put a vegetative roof in, or a paver roof, or a blue roof, or it may mean that we have a very tight area of occupiable space. We would like to have some outdoor space for our building owners and tenants. And so they want to make sure that the top area is usable and occupiable. Very rarely, I have had a few projects, but very rarely is it actually for the purpose of just growing plants. So that obviously is the important design challenge that we're faced with, and all of the other components are meant for supporting the life of those. At the same time, generally that's not the initial reason why we're doing that. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So there's the regulations. Sounds like there's some business reasons for the, and is there any proof that you can get a higher rate per square foot because yeah, oh, good.
Absolutely. So I think there is some ongoing research that needs to be performed to be able to answer those questions really fully. And of course, it's going to vary by your area, but certainly we have seen increase in property value related to having a vegetative roof, or even having a view of a vegetative roof. So not only is the building itself benefiting from that, but all of the surrounding buildings that have a view of the top get that benefit as well. Likewise, it may not necessarily seem to be a financial solution, but if you're familiar with evidence-based design in healthcare medicine, there's actually been enough research to document some of the first studies in evidence-based design where as patients had a view of nature, they were less likely to experience higher pain amounts, or to report high pain, and their stay in the hospital itself was actually shortened. And as you know, if we can decrease the amount of time that you're spending in the hospital, not only is that a lower cost period, but also it's a lower risk of hospital-acquired infection. So while that may not have been a financial reason to do it, certainly a lot of financial support for putting these vegetative roofs up there, as opposed to just a membrane type roof.
I still have to believe that becomes part of your statement about why you want to be within this building.
Absolutely. I think it starts to speak to how that building protects them, how it relates to nature, and how we're one with our community around us as a building occupant or owner. We're contributing instead of detracting from our local environment. And then, of course, if you make the right selections with vegetation, you can start to introduce native plants, or plants that are adapted to and then, of course, just being able to provide a space for people to safely get fresh air and experience nature as well, get a little sunshine throughout their day. So, yeah, I think these buildings are really marketable as places that you would want to live.
if I'm in a condo and I know I can go to the roof and I'll have this kind of experience, you're releasing me
Right.
from the city in a way, but I still get the beauty of the city.
Right.
And
Comes
then,
an amenity space. Yeah.
yeah, so that healthcare, as you mentioned, you did some arena projects, right?
Yes. Our most recent project was Dickey's Arena in Fort Worth. It replaced or is in addition to our Fort Worth Stock Show and Rodeo complex. And this space was just really fascinating to be able to work with. And that was an interesting design solution because it wasn't necessarily just about the vegetation. It was about a massive public gathering space on a really grand scale. Basically, it's an arena completely 360 degrees around the building. You can approach the building. You could have outdoor parties, and they've got places that have concerts, and you can actually isolate the different areas just outside of the arena for other uses as well. So it's a massive plaza deck. But what is interesting about that is I'm sure a lot of the occupants that go and experience that space, they feel like actually at grade level. But in reality, they're actually quite a few stories above grade. And below the space where they're standing is where all of the guts of the Coliseum are, where all of the actual work takes place. So the livestock is going in and out, or the monster trucks are going in and out, or the musicians are going in and setting up, for the concert that evening. And so all of that can take place, and yet you can support this very, very heavy, high density occupied space above. So much so that they can drive trucks on top of it, set those up. I actually went to a really neat party out there that had big tractors brought in that had, outdoor public restrooms and a bar set up, and it was a lot of fun. To be able to do that, you need to be able to support all of that weight. And so that's why the extruded polystyrene insulation that we make was so critical, and that was what we were working on. If they had chosen to do that all with complete concrete, it would have become such a heavy rooftop, essentially, that there would have been so many more columns needed at that grade level where all the service is taking place. So adding over a foot of insulation, not necessarily for its insulative properties in this case, as a fill to get water to drain to the right location in the drains, and also to be able to accommodate that weight was really critical in making that roof work. So it was a really, really neat application.
Would you go more onto the weight of the roof? What are some considerations?
So the types of insulation that get used in those types of applications are usually anywhere between a 40 PSI up to about a 100 PSI compressive strength requirement. And that's, pounds per square inch. That's a lot of weight. But you have to think a vegetative roof is quite heavy. So we have to accommodate the vegetation, the growing media, the drain board, which is there for retaining water to support the plants and all the wildlife there. And then all of the other components of the roof, we have to calculate that saturated. So we're looking for a worst case scenario during the design process, and then actually the structural engineer will size the structural system based off of that information. So it can get to be pretty significant. And then for these types of buildings, we're thinking about a fire truck having to drive up and get very close to the building to fight the fire, or a big truck bringing in equipment like we've talked about. For those, really cool parties and things. So being able to accommodate all of that really means that you have to be very selective about the types of insulation that you use in that scenario.
You're an architect. You've spent your career as an architect. So Owens Corning brings you in to help work with customers that have interest or learn, whatever, some need for knowledge, and you walk them through. There's a big commitment on Owens Corning's side to have somebody that's involved in that. What are some of the questions you get from architects and owners and developers?
It's actually quite the dream job. I actually replaced our previous architect. We had another architect on staff, Herbert Sloan, who just recently retired. And our role is specifically related to that. So having been in that position where we're taking on as the architect liability for the design of the building, you're responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of every person who is in that building at that time. For the building to just be successful for your customer and your client. So we understand the magnitude of what's needed, and we want to make sure that we can help them think of everything possible to make them successful. Obviously, we're not going to design it for them, but I've had enough experience in the types of questions and challenges that we've encountered that hopefully we can help them avoid particular, potential errors or gotten missed. So we are able to review details, to make recommendations on the insulation types, like we were discussing. Insulation, if that were, we have different types of insulation with different deflection amounts. On a vegetative roof, that may or may not be an issue. A lot of times, if your paver deflects by 1/8 of an inch, nobody notices. But if that same application were being done in a floor, under, terrazzo flooring in an airport, you would notice and you'd be pretty upset. So having that background as the architect and knowing what those applications require, knowing what the code official is going to be looking for, we work with the technical and marketing team to create documentation that hopefully will make their life easier when they have to submit for permitting and go through the construction process. We'll even come out to the job site and walk the site and talk about application and installation and any particular details that may come up. So it's a lot of fun. We get to work on a lot of projects. If anything, I went from working on probably, a dozen projects a year. I did mostly healthcare and historic preservation. I couldn't even count the amount of projects that I touch these days. So it's a lot of neat questions that we get. We kind of have I wouldn't say we have really a script, but we do have sort of a trend that we watch, and hopefully we produce technical documentation to help people avoid any pitfalls in the future.
So, we talked a little bit about like people's perception of a vegetative roof. How, besides local regulations and the opportunity now to have more living space on the building, what else is pushing somebody to reach out? Or is it, because my assumption is there's a lack of knowledge on how this could really benefit them. And they might be like, a vegetative roof would be fine. We don't need to do it.
Right. I think, everybody reaches that point when we're looking at value engineering, right? And how you get that project that started out having a vegetative roof all the way through construction and still have a vegetative roof. And I think one thing that gets overlooked a lot, or maybe discounted more than it should, is one of the other main purposes of a PMRA, a protected roof membrane assembly, is that we're creating major longevity on those rooftops. When you take that waterproofing membrane, and of course we're going to test it before we cover it, but when you take that membrane and you bury it beneath 1 or more feet of other materials, that membrane is no longer exposed to UV exposure, to foot traffic, to freeze-thaw cycles, to daily heat expansion and contraction. All of that is now protected. And you can kind of see through the types of projects that we've worked on, and even the rehabilitation type projects that we've worked on in the past, these projects are meant to last. They're quite the investment, obviously. So they're going on buildings that are intended to last for over 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. These buildings just don't, I won't say they don't require the maintenance, because every roof requires maintenance, but you're not having to factor in the cost of a full roof replacement as quickly. So that life cycle cost goes way up. And I think there's a lot of value in that gets discounted when we're looking at just that immediate upfront cost. So if you're ever looking for a good example, a lot of our a lot of them have some type of a plaza area or a vegetative roof type area that is built over maybe an underground facility. And those were quite large investments, but they're great examples to the longevity and the value that they bring to certain building types, for sure.
So I made a list of what of different things that people might not be cognizant of. So correct me as I go through. I have a few.
Okay.
Waterproofing roof systems and how that works. Vegetation.
Yeah.
Vegetation.
You gotta have a good roof.
Urban heat island.
That's true. Yes, the urban heat island effect is quite an impact, and that's another area where we're seeing some ordinances start to really embrace having a vegetative roof as well. I mean, obviously, that stormwater control is really taking precedence, but one of the benefits that these particular cities and locales are going to benefit from is that lower temperature just in their immediate area. Consequently, if you've got a rooftop air handling unit, that also means that it's going to have to work less to cool that air versus the heat that was immediately in that environment. So that's going to have a major impact. If it's not working as hard, you're also going to hopefully prolong the life of that piece of equipment. So again, that's another financial benefit. So there are just a lot of different examples of how this can benefit us.
These were the other thoughts I had. So aesthetics makes the beauty.
Just more pretty than a whole bunch of rocks on a roof, right? That's definitely the case.
The drainage that you already talked about. The pandemic, that there's a push to be more outside now. And I would think that that's a real asset to a building, is having a vegetative roof.
Having some good outdoor space to spread out and get a little bit of elbow room. Yeah, that is such an interesting situation, because just last year, that never would have even crossed my mind, that having a space where we could all go social distance and still get work done, and maybe take a break from having that mask on 8 hours a day at work could be an advantage. Certainly, we want to make sure that everybody's safe and not overusing the space incorrectly, but having that opportunity is really valuable, to be able to just go sit outside and take a little break and a little respite from all that's going on in our world today, for sure.
Yeah, but that, offer that within a structure. It makes me think, like, you're buying a house and it says how many square feet without the basement. And then you turn the basement, you fix it up, and all of a sudden you have all this additional square feet. And this is another step to open up livable areas, right?
Absolutely. We do actually get a number of homeowners that contact us, and sometimes they will discount themselves. And I have to say, a vegetative roof is a vegetative roof. It doesn't matter if it goes on your home garage or if it goes on state capitol or anywhere in between. It's relatively the same components. I mean, obviously every roof is a custom application, but there certainly is some value to that, for sure. I do know some homeowners who have really capitalized on that space. Particularly, we had recently somebody who contacted us through our Get Tech services, and they were asking about roof transitions to the wall and how that parapet should be handled. And I said, I know it's not my place, but you might want to consider maybe including, this kind of insulation or selecting a different type of membrane, because while this may not be something that you choose today, in the future, this house happened to be on the beach in California, in some very, very prominent property. I said, you might want to be able to capitalize that and either build up or have a nice space to go and occupy throughout the day. So always keep that in mind.
It's gonna extend the roof's lifespan by doing this. The way they're engineered is at a level that you'll actually have less problems. There could be, well, if we put vegetative roof on, we're gonna have more problems, but it's more than the reverse of that.
That's definitely true. I think, you know, we do have people that have the perception that they're extremely high maintenance, and certainly you can build a very high maintenance vegetative roof assembly. Absolutely. You know, we're big gardeners, so we like pulling weeds and doing all those things, but not every roof requires that much effort. There are different varieties. So there are paver roof assemblies. There are roofs that have even AstroTurf at this point. There are extensive roofs, which are basically just a very consistent layer of sedums typically. And that type of a plant is the type that if you were to just take a little clipping of it and drop it on the ground, it will root itself. It's a pretty easy peasy kind of a plant to deal with in most environments. Now you will have to pull weeds. That's just the reality of it. But I can say that there are actually companies now in some of these areas where we see a lot of vegetative roofs that are dedicated to this type of maintenance. They understand which plant is a plant, which one is a weed, and they can, you know, capitalize on that.
So the last one on my list, which might be totally off, was I was thinking it can help control noise pollution because of where it rests within the building.
So that is actually an interesting concept, and I suspect that is possibly the I don't have enough data at this point to have some really good documentation for you. But actually, ironically, we have a great acoustics lab, and I've been working with some of our acousticians to document some other aspects of some exterior wall designs that we've been working on. We've had discussions about how much vegetation is required to reduce noise. One thing that we know without having to give you actual numbers and document it is that just by the nature of vegetation alone, we're going to reduce the amount of vibration that you're going to feel. So that structural vibration through the structure inside of the building, that is already going to be reduced. So that would be very helpful. So I can see some extreme value for these types of roofs in areas where you may have helicopters flying over very often, or airport applications, anywhere like that. I think that would be extremely valuable. So I think you've really touched on an area where we could do a little more research and learn a little bit more for sure. Good job.
Do I have to fund it now?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
You bring up the idea.
That's an RP soon. That's how it works.
So,
set up a meeting soon.
so you're exposed to all these things. How does it impact your personal life and the decisions you make as being so close to this type of offering? Obviously, we talked about gardening and things like that, but a lot of times it makes you make different types of decisions from what you've learned and what you're knowledgeable of. I'm just wondering how that translated.
That's a very interesting question. I haven't ever had before. I would say for me, it helps me to understand the order of magnitude of when I'm making decisions. So first and foremost, that roof can't leak. So when I start in my own life, on my own projects, when I'm drawn to, okay, does the waterproofing look like it's compatible? Does everything look like it's continuous? Is it fully adhered? You know, really starting to look at that type of detailing because to be right before we start to put everything else on top of it. And, you know, so I'm restoring an 1893 home, and that's really where I started when I acquired the home, was water infiltration and trying to address that first. Then I started, you know, I start to look at the actual, so, okay, we've addressed moisture. We know that that's under control. By that very nature, that product is also the air barrier for the roof. Then we start to address the actual thermal performance of the roof. So right above that, we've got some protection with a root barrier system, just kind of talking about all the layers and everything. So we're going to protect that roof membrane from roots if they ever were to get through, which typically they're not going to get that down, but we put a root barrier in, and then we start to look at insulating. And commonly, we'll see even more insulation put in than is required prescriptively by the code. You know, you may be required to have an R20, which would be 4 inches of extruded polystyrene insulation. but we start to introduce creativity there with the insulation itself. We channel that insulation so that we can drive the water to the drains and the drain location. So again, we're still managing water in that application. To taper it so we can create different shapes and forms, or we can make a sloped roof go flat. That's something really fun that we did, particularly on the Dickies Arena. That was a really unique situation where they had drains installed and we needed to slope to the drain, and then we wanted to make it flat. So we made it flat and filled all of that for another foot of insulation, and then we put different drains in a different location. And I say we, I didn't actually do it, but the architect and the design team, really genius in the way that they worked all of that out. You would never even notice that there were drains when you get up on that roof today. So the drains are so tiny and so well integrated into the application. And so those drains are connected to the final drains, which are in a different location. And the insulation is what helped us do all of that. So the insulation serves a couple of those purposes. Obviously, it has to be extremely water resistant because it's going to be exposed to the water since it's above the membrane. And then, of course, it provides that thermal performance. From there, we start to manage the actual vegetation portion. So we usually have a drainage board of some type that's going to perform a couple of different duties. It drains moisture off of the roof. It provides oxygen to the roots of the plants, because all these plants back here, they are growing in clay soil, but clay soil is notorious for not having enough oxygen and nutrients for the plants to be able to actually uptake and use. So we have to break all of that up. And so the way that we do that on a vegetative is we have these drainage boards that allow for that to happen. And then the actual growing media that we select for the vegetative roof, it's actually not potting soil. A lot of people think you can just, go to Lowe's and get you a bag of Miracle-Gro potting soil and you're good, right? Which is a great product, but not for this application. That would typically become too saturated and not necessarily support the types of plants that we would put up on the roof. So these are specially engineered vegetative roof growing media types. They're usually expanded shale and a couple of other types of products that are intended to absorb only so much moisture that would satisfy the plants and then drain the rest of it off very quickly. So it's quite an interesting engineering feat that you just don't realize when you just see some pretty plants on the roof. And then the landscape architect picking the actual plant. Yeah.
Well, for years now, I get, that observing nature and what can we learn from nature and how do we apply it to these systems is I think, a wonderful example.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And honestly, that's one of the biggest challenges is trying to mimic something that is not necessarily nature, but you're not even going to notice it. If you design it well and you design it right, a lot of times you don't even realize you're on a vegetative roof. And a great example of that is the U.S. Coast Guard project, massive project, acres. It's this huge line. They've got deer roaming around on the vegetative roof, and you wouldn't even know that it's a VRA, just honestly because of the sheer size and volume of everything. But imagine the types of engineering that went into that to make something. We like to say in architecture, right? It's actually harder to make things look simple. When we build these concrete buildings that we just want exposed concrete, trying to figure out where all the fasteners are going to go so that when the concrete form is removed, it looks attractive and we can attach everything correct. Components. It's the same situation here. Making it look more simple is actually often requiring much more engineering. So kind of neat. Yeah, commendable to those people that take it on.
Well, you start thinking about quotes from like Einstein when you say something. So we have to wrap up, but before we do, I know that you're really heavy on LinkedIn. You have a website, and we'll make sure everybody has that. What are ways to communicate with you, or not necessarily directly, but just learn more about this approach?
Sure. We actually have some great resources online. We have been working on a resource called Enclosure Solutions. where you can actually go to the website and tell us what we like to say, tell us how you're building it. We've got a solution. So you can select a wall, a foundation, or a roof, and then let's say you select roof, and then you tell us you've got a concrete deck with a vegetative roof on top. If you click that, we will actually give you a 3D illustration of all of the pieces and parts and components. It's just something that we're aware is going to be a part of your assembly. Make sure that that's your checklist, that you've addressed all of those things. And then, of course, we will have, CAD details, BIM files, guide specifications, all the tech bulletins related to how to make that roof fire safe, code compliant for wind uplift, all of those different concerns. So that's a really great resource. Our online technical resources are gettech@owenscorning.com or 1-800-GET-PINK. You can reach us there. I definitely work with that team really closely to answer all the VRA questions. And then we've also got some really great online webinars and things like that as resources as well. So as far as Owens Corning goes, those are some great resources. Outside of Owens Corning, some really great reading material. The National Roofing Contractors Association has a book out about vegetative roof assemblies. It's the Vegetative Roof Design Manual. I think it is entering its 4th edition, and it's always been something that I used to learn back when I was a little baby starting. That's always is also an organization that really helped us in the United States get off the ground with our modern vegetative roofs. They have done a lot of studies just calculating the square footage, the square acres in America of vegetative roofs. They tried to work on kind of average cost per square foot, but unfortunately that is such a unique application that's quite a challenge. But they've just done a lot of really good research that can help you make a good business case to keep that on your project if that becomes a value engineering concern, for sure.
Good. Thank you. Well, hopefully in the future we can revisit and really extend the understanding. Thanks for doing this, Tiffany.
Thanks, Dean. It was very nice talking with you.
Nice talking with you.